Which players' stocks are rising? Who is following? And how does all of it impact the Utah Jazz? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, and as always, I'm excited and honored to be here with you guys, filling in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz. I'm a lifelong Jazz fan who's a credentialed NBA draft analyst, attendee of the 2023 and 2024 NBA Draft Combine, Utah Jazz broadcast assistant, and statistician, as well as a lover of college basketball. So don't expect all the geeky numbers of usual to be gone, but I will bring a unique new perspective as a diehard college hoops fan to get you guys prepared to know the most about these NBA draft prospects and also just make you as knowledgeable as possible about your and my Utah Jazz. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen each and every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms. And that includes YouTube. So if you can watch on YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is comment anything below. And today's question is a simple one. Which riser do you like the most? And which faller do you like the most? And hope the Jazz can pick up. Give the answer to that. And we'll talk about that in those comments, because I think the way that the draft shapes up from pick 6 through 9 obviously determines who the Jazz take. Like, that's an obvious statement. I'm not trying to say anything new and revelatory there, but it's particularly true in this case because of the way that there's not too many players that have an extremely high floor or an extremely high ceiling, and teams may lean towards safety more than this year, where potential is often coveted more. All right, so let me take you through what I got on the docket for you guys today. In the first segment, I'll talk about guys near the Jazz's first pick at number 10, who I perceive to be rising. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Often these rumors end up being either 100% true or 100% false, because they're either put there in order for people to believe and change the perception of others, or they're totally true. And I tend to believe they're more likely to be true than they are to be false, because sources are getting better. In the second segment, I'll talk about guys who seem to be trending downward and could be there for the Jazz at number 10 or maybe they'll fall below, and maybe the Jazz think about taking that player, and maybe there's validity to as to why they're falling, and that's why the Jazz abstain from taking these players. So we'll talk about those players. Do I like them? Do I not? And then the third and final segment, I'll talk about the players around the Jazz's 29th and 32nd pick who are moving up and moving down, and players that I think are likely tied to the Jazz, and I'll give you my thoughts on all the players mentioned in all three segments. So let's dive right in. Let's start at the top. This is a guy I've talked about a lot on Locked On NBA Big Board, as well as Locked On Jazz. Talked about him briefly yesterday, and I said he's not the pipe dream, because I think that's Stephon Castle for the Jazz, but I think he's among the pipe dreams for the Jazz front office based on what they covet. Let's review what the Jazz front office covets. What they covet is length, athleticism, the ability to learn, and the ability to put the ball in the hoop in different manners, and then defend, because the Jazz, they could use a lot of help, but defensively they were really inept, and they're trying to almost overcorrect the wrongs they had. They had a diminutive backcourt a few years ago on a team that had championship aspirations, and that's kind of been a thing of the past. You don't really see diminutive backcourts anymore. Ironically enough, Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland formed a relatively small backcourt, and they're out early. And what did they complement those two guys with? An enormous front court. Well, the Jazz have one of those guys from that initial enormous front court, comprised of Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, and previously Lauri Markkanen. Now the Jazz have Lauri Markkanen. Taylor Hendricks is in the fold, Walker Kessler. But who else can supplement those guys and maybe take them to a next level? Let's talk about Tidjane Salaun. Tidjane Salaun, I believe, will be taken no longer than 8th overall. Could the Jazz trade up and get him? I think that's feasible, but I don't think the Jazz can get him at 10. The reason I do bring him up here, though, is an important one. And I think that it's worthy of a distinction. He is what the Jazz covet, and there is a draft principle of going out and getting what you want. And in this draft, I think it's going to be easier to trade upward because fewer teams have exactly that in mind of what they want. The Jazz have the metrics, the size, the athleticism, all those things are in spades. Like, if you haven't heard my pitch on him, the everydayers certainly have, and I won't try to kill you guys with the same nonsense. And basically what his pitch is, he's 18 years old, scored 19 points in the quarterfinals against a team that was better. He was the best player on the floor, runs like a deer, has a lot of body to put the muscle on. He's already 6'8", 6'9", 210 to 212 pounds. He has the ability to shoot the ball, shot 33%, runs the floor very well, shot free throws well, rebounds, is a raw defender, but has all the tools. You're picking a toolsy player, and you're emulating what Danny Ainge did with the Celtics, having a lot of wings that are lengthy and have the ability to defend and influence basketball on both sides of the basketball court. Now, similarly, following suit, Cody Williams. The reason I say he's a riser, even though, picking top 10, that's not necessarily the most prolific rise, because he's been listed around here, is he didn't have a very good combine, but I've heard the workouts are very good. I don't know for certain how informed all these people that I hear this from are, but I did hear on a very good source that Cody Williams killed his Jazz workout, and I know there's a ton of players that had good workouts, and you always hear the positives. You rarely hear, oh, this guy was terrible in a workout. But I heard he did a very well in his Jazz workout, and I heard he's performed well in another workout. Wasn't told the team in that one, but he was very impressive in two workouts that I heard distinctly, and from two different sources, actually, that I trust, that he was very good in those workouts. So I'm imagining he's been very good in other workouts as well that I didn't hear about. I'm imagining that he's working out for teams that are drafting above the Jazz. So my hunch is he's probably off the board, but if he's there for the Jazz at number 10, he's the guy that I would take because I think he's exactly what the Jazz covet in terms of being able to do things with the ball in his hands, play multiple positions, play multiple different roles. He's got the measurables at 6'8", ball handling that's on display, shot 42%, even though I don't actually have that much faith in his jump shot, at least what he demonstrated at the combine, nor at Colorado. He only shot 1.5 per game. But if he's doing well in workouts and teams that he's working out for are within the top 10, I kind of expect him to be taken beyond there, because he also has just too many traits and an older brother who's laid the foundation that I think it's pretty hard to argue with what Jalen Williams has done and say, well, we're not going to try to get Cody Williams and maybe get someone who can do some of what Jalen does in a draft that fairly devoid of stars. So those two are obvious. Now here are where the rumors get a little funkier, that I think these guys will be there at 10. And I don't know if I want the Jazz to take any of these guys, but there are rumors of these three rising. The first one being Zach Edey. Zach Edey is a behemoth, 7'4", moves well for his size. He is a good athlete, believe it or not, at an enormous size. I've heard rumors, the ones that I don't know the person that started these. They weren't told specifically to me. They've been more on Twitter, that he was told he's going to go to the top 10. You look at his workouts, who he's worked out for. The Jazz are one of two teams within the top 10 who Zach Edey has worked out for. Personally, I wouldn't want the Jazz to take him at number 10, but here are the pluses. He's huge. He's got pretty good touch, could rim protect at a high level, and is a better athlete than advertised. That's basically what it is. I still don't think the Jazz are likely to take him, but it's worth talking about that. A guy that was mostly projected to be at the end of the first round is now kind of in this green room range, and he already said he's going to stay and celebrate with his teammates at Purdue, which I think is admirable. But basically, he would be a green room guy, and that's something that's shocking. And if he's got a top 10, like, I don't know if it's a lock, but people say a lot of people who've got a guarantee in the lottery. Well, it could be the Utah Jazz. I don't know. Okay, next one up is Bub Carrington. I talked about him on Locked On NBA Big Board. If any of you guys listen to both, I talked about him being a point guard that I perceive to be a better point guard, not necessarily combo guard, but a better point guard than Reed Sheppard, who's warranting top 5, top 7 conversations. Bub Carrington is certainly on the rise. This is a guy that was at number 30 or so on most boards coming into the combine. I had him around 22, I think, at that point. Right now, I've got him at 13 or 14. He is a 6'5" point guard who played at Pittsburgh. He was very much the guy at Pittsburgh. His shooting numbers dipped because of it, but in his first game as a collegiate athlete, he had 18, 12, and 10, a triple-double. Then he finished off the season with 27, 24, and 23 in 3 of his last 5 games, heading into the ACC tournament and including the ACC tournament against North Carolina, North Carolina, Boston College, and I want to say it was Virginia Tech. So those are 3 really good games against good competition when it mattered most, and he's able to distribute and shoot. And the question was, well, how well can he shoot? Because his percentages weren't that great. Well, I think when you have a player that's facing the defenses that are so keyed up to guard him and make it difficult on him, and he's still able to get shots, it really matters more than the percentage. And I watched him shoot at the combine. He had the best off the dribble numbers of anyone. So he can shoot the basketball. He creates for others. And he's a freshman, 18 years old, who stepped in and played great basketball in the ACC right away. And I think he's going to find his way into the lottery seemingly out of nowhere. And there's one more guy from the ACC, a freshman, but he is not 18. He's older. That's Kyshawn George. Kyshawn George is a 6'7", smooth shooting wing who operates well with the ball in his hands. I've kind of had this hot and cold relationship when evaluating Kyshawn George because I like his shot. Very high arcing, good touch, knows how to play. He is a very slow-footed, very, very slow-footed athlete. He's not a half-court athlete. He's not an open-court athlete. Needs to get his momentum to even get going. The appeal of him is that he could be a big guard, someone who can be a secondary ball handler, come off screens, create, and knock down open threes. The Jazz have had guys like that, a la Joe Ingles, who've really panned out well. George, to me, would not be the pick at number 10 of my preference, but I do think he has traits that are unique enough to warrant top 20 buzz. At 10, I just think there's more top-end talent you can seek, but that's my preference. I prefer to go after potential as opposed to what I would consider to be a solid skill set that leads to a solid floor. Well, those are guys who are rising. Next up, we're going to talk about guys who are falling down boards who could be in play for the Jazz at 10, because if someone's rising, that means someone's got to fall. It's just the way the draft works. But first, we're going to talk about game time. With killer last-minute deals, all prices, views from your seat, and their lowest guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Yeah, that means Jazz tickets. So you should become excited about seeing these rookies for the first time. Or if you want to see LeBron come to Utah, find the Lakers and come see him play in that game easily. It's just that easy. With killer last-minute deals, all the prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes all of the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets, MLB tickets, and whatever you want, concerts, shows, all of it. They have great last-minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, easy to find and buy MLB tickets, and for every event in your arena. And I can attest the MLB ticket one because you have views from the seats. And I looked through these when I was perusing White Sox tickets to attend while I was at the NBA Combine in Chicago. And you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy it. And I'll tell you, it's worth it, because if you pick a baseball stadium and then there's a stanchion in your way, a pole, maybe a dugout elevates and you can't see, well, no longer fret about that, because you can see exactly what you're going to see at the stadium by using Game Time. It's an awesome feature. And they also have a lowest price guarantee where Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets or MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, for $20 off your first purchase. So download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, and I got one more question for you. You just heard this before, but are you guys watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long and you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Well, make the switch to Locked On Sports today, and it's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So if players are going to rise, that means players are going to fall. And that's going to be around the Jazz. You're going to see players that we don't expect infiltrate the top 10, but you're also going to see players that we've likened to be top 5 picks from the beginning of the process till end fall out of the top 10. It happens every year. And this year is even more unpredictable and harder to predict and rate the players than previous years that I've been doing it and previous years that you guys have been fans. So who are guys that there are rumors that are falling, and I think they are substantial rumors. The first one we've talked about the last few days on Locked on NBA Big Board, as well as Locked on Jazz. I had James Barlow on for those of you who listened to it. And we talked about Ron Holland. Ron Holland was probably the most likely player if you asked around different scouts who was going to go number one if we started this process in November. Well, he's falling, and it seems like he's tumbling down, and the Jazz will have a real shot to nab him at number 10. For those of you, if you've missed my analysis on him, here's what I'll say. He is an 18-year-old who scored 20 points per game in the G League. That's a positive. He's 6'7". That's a positive. He has a 38.5-inch vertical. That's a positive. The negatives are he doesn't shoot very well, and his shot looks okay. So it's not like he has something that you think you can clearly fix right away. Now, the negatives are if he's not impacting the game offensively and he's kind of a dare shooter, then he's an energy guard devoid of kind of playmaking, and he's more a straight line driver as opposed to one with craftiness. He attacks closeouts, but you can only attack closeouts if they close out and respect your shot. He's a more of a run and jump type of athlete than someone who does very well on the half court, but he does have quick twitch. I've likened him at the high end to come out to RJ Barrett. He's a right-handed version of RJ Barrett. And at the low end, I think he reminds me of Josh Okogie in the sense that he's a underskilled, good athlete that's defensively oriented. Do you take him at 10? I think you can get good bang for your buck if you get a guy like RJ Barrett or a near all-star. I did an episode a while ago talking about who's the most likely player in this draft to become an all-star, and I talked about him as one of the guys. The next guy is the one I would say has the best chance of scoring 20 points per game early in his career, and that's Rob Dillingham. Rob Dillingham appears to be falling, but I wonder if this one's more of a smokescreen. This is me reading through the tea leaves. He's a Clutch Sports agent, and Clutch Sports is notorious for having a lot of power. It's Rich Paul. It's where LeBron is. It's where Bronny James is. Well, these guys tend to be able to manipulate and get workouts when they want them. He's been vocal about wanting to go to the Spurs, so maybe that's the 8th pick. Maybe it's the 4th pick. The way I see him falling is if the Spurs take a guard, namely Stephon Castle at number 4, I think that means they take a wing, likely Tidjane Salaun at number 8. And then I don't think any of the other teams really want this guard who profiles to be a kind of an empty calorie scoring guard. The reason I say he's got the most potential to score a lot is he shoots 45% from 3. He does it off the dribble and off the catch. He's a very good pick and roll player, both scoring for himself and creating for others. He is diminutive in stature, and he does need the ball in his hands a lot. Players like that tend to have not won a lot, and maybe that's why he's slipping. But to me, he is a guy who is a first or second option on a team, like a watered-down skill set of what Trae Young was. Maybe he reminds me of Darius Garland. Well, Garland was an all-star in the first 5 years of his NBA career. Garland is making the Cavaliers think about who to prioritize between he and Donovan Mitchell. And we all know how good Donovan Mitchell is. Part of that equation, obviously, is Donovan Mitchell. How long is he going to stay in Cleveland? Whereas Garland, they may get longer. But he's good enough to warrant discussion about that. Now, you get to the next factor in the equation. Rob Dillingham, you look at those teams. Trae Young made the Eastern Conference Finals since his team has been in mediocrity. They've been toiling in mediocrity. Now, Dillingham, I don't think is as good as Trae Young, but I do think he can score the rock, like in between what Trae Young and Darius Garland have done. Maybe even someone said Isaiah Thomas on Twitter. Isaiah Thomas had a really good supporting cast in Boston, but eventually there wasn't enough ammunition, and he was victimized defensively and offensively. His shot, the way he scored was going to eventually be inefficient, even as great of a scorer as he was. And that feels like the way that Rob Dillingham will have to play. So that's why I think he's falling, but I would be happy to take him because I think he's got tremendous skill set. Like his skills are at the upper echelon of anyone's skills, whether it's shooting for him or Ryan Dunn's defense. You could take any individual skill and he's up there in terms of what he can do with the basketball in his hands. But I do think he's falling. I do think the Jazz should take a look. But as I've said, even though I've ranked Dillingham very, very high at times at number 1, because I believe that much in his ability to score the basketball, I don't think he fits exactly what the Jazz are prioritizing in adding length and players that are complementary and playing basketball similar to what you saw from the Boston Celtics and winning a championship, of prioritizing two-way players, offense and defense, defending multiple positions, shooting open shots. Dillingham, I don't think fits that narrative. And now the last guy, I don't know if he's falling for sure, but in mocks I've read and workouts I've heard about, this is a guy who's shot the ball great, but I don't think people are thinking well, like that's not going to move the needle because everyone knows Dalton Knecht can shoot. Dalton Knecht is very much squarely in the Jazz's wheelhouse of who could be selecting Knecht, and the Jazz could be looking right at him. But I think he's one of those people who's a linchpin in the draft for the Utah Jazz. If he's picked by a team who wants a more veteran presence, a more immediately able to contribute, maybe someone of the ilk of like Max Strus is like someone he could emulate, maybe a smaller version of Bojan Bogdanovic for what he did to the Jazz. If you're looking for Jazz stuff, like someone who can use his body to score, come off pin downs and shoot, but not be a great defender, but scrap a little bit. And for what it's worth, I think Bogey's a better player than Knecht will ever be. But just in terms of that's a role that sounds similar to you guys for what Knecht can do. He can do it, but maybe if he goes number 8, for instance, to the Spurs, I don't see that one happening because they're youthful. But now maybe 9, if the Grizzlies hold their pick, they've been vocal. They want to get a center, namely Donovan Clingan. The Grizzlies take him. That means I think Cody Williams or Ron Holland comes down to the Jazz. If at 7 he gets interest, that I think really helps the Jazz. So I think the Jazz want to be rooting for Knecht to come off the board. And if he's taken at 10 and he's 10th on the board, that's how it'll be played. He seems to me that guy that's not exactly whom the Jazz desire, but it's a one the Jazz will be happy to be, okay, you know what, we'll take a Dalton Knecht. Maybe you want a Devin Carter to infiltrate the top 10 and push down some of these younger, more talented, more upside-heavy players, but the Jazz won't complain about Dalton Knecht. That's the way I foresee him, and I think he may slide because teams are going to, as the draft approaches, say, well, if we're drafting in the lottery already, we probably aren't ready to compete, so let's take an upside piece. That's the way I see Knecht falling, but that's also the pitch for why he's going to go higher because people covet safety in this draft. All right, next up, we're going to check in on the late round, the late first round, early second round picks that the Jazz have. But first, a word from Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 5 million members. It's just the most fun and exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats for a shot to win up to $100 times your cash, With the Prize Picks, you could turn $10 into 1,000. That's 100 times 10 equals 1,000. In a single game, watching your favorite sports this summer, you can make a Prize Picks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're locked in. I like to do it on tennis personally. I'm not allowed to bet on the NBA as I work for the Jazz, so I like to bet on or make my picks on tennis. And I like to make picks on more or less aces. I tend to go with the more when the matches are elongated. And it's a really fun way to stay engaged with those matches. But if you guys just want more hoops and the finals have ended, well, the action doesn't stop, especially on Prize Picks. It never stops on Prize Picks. But women's basketball is just getting started with young stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese looking to make names for themselves alongside greats like Breanna Stewart and A'ja Wilson. You can win up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out. So download the app today and use Locked On NBA as the code. So that's the promo code. Use code Locked On NBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Alrighty, welcome back into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin with you here, rounding out the show. As I talked about guys who are rising, I've talked about guys who are falling around the pick number 10. Let's talk about 29 and 32. I personally don't think the Jazz keep both of them. I think they're going to look to trade up, maybe consolidate both to move up to 22 or something like that, which has been rumored. Or maybe that they're part in a bigger deal altogether. I just don't think the Jazz are going to have that many rookies on the roster next year after having 3 this past season. But let's talk about that area of the draft, who's rising, who's falling, and what my thoughts are about those players. So let's start with Isaiah Crawford. You heard James Barlow talk about him. I talked about him briefly. There's always a select mold of coveted players in the NBA, and one is the Kawhi Leonard build. Even if those players aren't going to turn out to be Kawhi Leonard, they rarely fail. So who fits into that? Obviously, Kawhi Leonard. Patrick Williams is a recent one. And this build, by the way, is long arms, kind of strong body, huge hands, and big legs. Like there is very specific measurements. I think it's over a 7'2" wingspan, hands spreads about 11 inches or more. And then like I said, wingspan 7'2". So usually that means you're about 6'7" to 6'9". Okay. So Patrick Williams, pretty good player. He's had issues staying healthy, went number 4 in the draft. Tari Eason was picked 17th in a redraft, would go higher than 17. He's a rebounding monster, defensively gets his hands on everything, has huge hands. He has great length, crazy high motor. OG Anunoby isn't necessarily happy with his role in the Knicks, but he is a coveted basketball player. You look at a few more out there that are just thriving in their roles. Those are just three that come to mind. Of course, there's Kawhi Leonard. Well, Isaiah Crawford's kind of the next up on that. James Barlow likens him. I think he said he's the nephew or the son of OG Anunoby in the last podcast I did with him. And it's because their body builds is similar. The reason Crawford isn't as highly sought after by many is he went to Louisiana Tech. Well, that's been fruitful for the Jazz before. You got Karl Malone, obviously, Paul Millsap, now Kenny Lofton. Could it be Isaiah Crawford too? And he shoots the ball well. The issue with Crawford is he had knee injuries, but he shot the ball well, was a defensive player of the year in that conference. And I think he's going to be a first-round pick, and people, I think, generally are underrating him, but I think he is on the rise. Who else is on the rise? Enrique Freeman. I talked about him briefly on Locked On NBA Big Board yesterday. He's a guy from Toledo, I've heard, has shot the ball very, very well. He has long arms, a kind of a burly body, similar to what Isaiah Crawford possesses. Not quite the mover, but he is possible to play the 3 of the 4. He's from Akron, kind of came out of nowhere, went to the G League camp, excelled there, went to the NBA Combine, shot very well there, and he's rising up draft boards. I think he's going to find himself picked between 25 and 35. And then there's 2 AJs. One is spelled AJ, and the other one is AJAY. So AJ Johnson may be the skinniest player in the NBA as soon as he enters the NBA. He looks like he's 15 out there. Tremendous athlete, played in the NBL, and he has flashes of seeming like, oh, he doesn't really know how to play basketball yet. And then he has flashes, well, that guy could be really good. So he's a developmental project. I personally don't think that one makes that much sense for the Jazz, but he's someone that I expect to rise, and there's some positive stock that I've heard from multiple sources. And then there's AJ Mitchell, AJAY, went to UC Santa Barbara. I saw him play in the same game as Kyshawn George, UC Santa Barbara versus Baylor, and he was the better player in that game, easily. He was the best NBA prospect on that floor, and that floor included Kyshawn George, who was an all-rookie performer for our Utah Jazz. So that's a pitch right there. But basically, think of what Nembhard did for the Pacers and scale that down a little bit. Maybe not quite the athlete that Nembhard is, but a big guard who's able to control, isn't an amazing shooter, but he's an adequate one, uses his body well to create for himself and others off of pick and rolls, and is a very heady player, both offensively and defensively effective. He's a guy that I think could get late first-round consideration. I wouldn't be surprised if the Jazz consider him to maybe run the second unit. Now, who's falling? If these guys are rising, who are guys that many people know that would be surprised how far they're going to be selected down in the lottery, or they were lottery, or down in the first round, maybe even fall the second round? One guy that I've never personally liked as a fit for the Jazz, or just as a prospect when evaluating the draft for Locked On NBA Big Board, is Kyle Filipowski. I haven't heard positive news about him. I haven't really heard that much negative news, but no news probably isn't great news when it comes to a player who went to Duke. Filipowski was often in the spotlight. He's an unconventional big in the sense that he can put the ball on the floor, is supposed to shoot it well, but didn't actually shoot that well in his years at Duke. He is skillful, but he's not a good athlete. He really did not measure well, had a negative wingspan, did not jump well. Obviously not a great standing reach with the short arms. Shot is the real deal breaker there, but I don't think he's a great defender, and I don't think offensively his game, even though people say, well, he can pass. Yeah, he makes good reads, and he was okay defensively in college. I just don't see the way it translates to the NBA. And maybe you're asking the wrong person, because I've never really liked the way Kyle Filipowski plays, but I don't think anyone right now is high on him. So for a guy who is largely predicted to be a lottery pick, I wouldn't be surprised if he's there at 29 and the Jazz were to pass on him. I personally wouldn't want them to take him at 29. Another guy that I don't know if he's falling or if his stock is kind of stagnating is Bobby Klintman. He's from Sweden, played at Wake Forest, then went and played in the NBL. He played for a team called the Taipans, and I like what Bobby Klintman does well. I feel like he's a good shooter, but his numbers did not reflect that. Different than Filipowski. He shot more threes, and he was asked to be a spacer, but his shot looks really pretty in person. I've seen him shoot it in person, and I was more impressed for him. But athletically, he did not test particularly well. He's a 6'10", kind of skinny and not very physical, small forward type in the NBA. And I don't know how often that type works, but it's one that if you thread the needle and get the right player to play who could play the 4, probably should play the 4 to play the 3. It elevates his stock. And now if he's the 4, I don't know if he's got the physicality, but he does have the shot that kind of distinguishes him. So he's a guy that I would be intrigued by should he fall to the Jazz at 29 or 32. I believe his stock has him kind of sitting in that range when previously entering this year. I think many thought he would be a top 20 pick, certainly 20 through 30. So we'll see where he goes. Let me know if I'm missing anyone that you would be interested in at these points. I know there's a lot of boards that say guys like Jalen Tyson or Baylor Shireman are available. I'm telling you, I think both those guys are going to go in the top 20. So that's why I did not include them. Same with Bub Carrington, who I talked about, I think will find his way into the lottery or very close to the lottery. So when you're looking at some boards, make sure to listen to some of the rumors, and they're not all steadfast and true, but I think many of them have more transparency than maybe you'd be led to believe with all the smokes and rumors that lead up, and maybe in the football draft. I think the NBA one's a little more clear cut, but who knows? This is one of those drafts where there's no prediction I'm all that confident in, and that's what makes it fun, but it makes it a little scary. So hopefully our Jazz do well in drafting, and I've got another fun episode. And just a reminder for those of you tuning in tomorrow, Tony Jones from The Athletic. He's a true hoops head, knows his game from the collegiate court, NBA court, high school scene, and all of it. So he's very informed on these prospects, and I'm having him on to talk ball with me. But the episode is coming out tomorrow night, not the tomorrow morning. Like I typically try to put them out early in the morning for you guys. Tony couldn't make it work until late at night, but we're going to get that out there, and it should be a really fun one for you guys to listen to over the weekend and get you prepared for draft week. So thank you guys for listening. And with your next listen, consider listening to Locked On NBA Big Board if you're really liking the draft scene, or if you want to hear more about maybe free agency or a recap of the finals, check out Locked On NBA. And the last question I got for you guys is a similar one. You've heard this many times, but Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the Fire TV channels app. So Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the league with all the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. I appreciate you guys for listening. Always do. I'm excited to do one more episode with Tony Jones. Then it's back with David Locke taking over for draft week. Appreciate you guys as always. And as always, go Jazz.